NBR. Once these children reach university age, it will be the beginning of the end of the current industrial model. Industrial age education is a phrase in vogue to describe the traditional model of education born in the industrial age, one size fits all, and the solution is said to be now personalised learning to equip our children with the skills and values and characteristics and knowledge they need to thrive in our modern society. Are you able to get behind the jargon and understand what it means exactly for children with phones and their noses buried in devices? Do you think anybody has much of a handle on it, about what will happen?
I understand the idea of targeted learning. I understand that really well, because it's exactly what I think should happen. The problem with it is that if you don't have the base level with which to facilitate the need to learn or to grow your own educational prospects, like your reading, writing, arithmetic, basic stuff. If you don't have that, if you come at it from a different point of view, then it becomes an incredibly difficult thing like my kid needs to know now at 14 what he's going to be doing when he's 20. So that he can pick the right courses for it. That sort of targeted learning presupposes that you know exactly what you're going to do and where you're going to go. I think that's very difficult. I think it's an extremely difficult proposition.
So, yeah, okay. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, technology has always evolved around this to mean that we have to adapt to keep up. You know, once upon a time, there was a person employed to push buttons and lifts. And so things are happening and changing so quickly now that we, instead of having 3 careers in our lifetime, we are looking down the barrel of 15. So, like, as Peter said, it's more about training kids to think and to adapt. The trouble at the moment is that change is happening so quickly. It's so tangible. We can see it in front of our eyes. That the teachers who are doing the teaching aren't necessarily advanced enough to know what it is that they're teaching for and how it's going to play out.
If you could have had your learning customised and tailored, as Peter says, when you were 12 or 14, would it have helped much, do you think, looking back? Or would you have been...
It's really difficult to know that. And so, I mean, I sort of fell into doing what I was doing as a result of not fitting, you know, largely. So if they'd targeted it and found a way to fit, then I wouldn't be doing what I'd be doing now. You know, I would have fitted somewhere. And I don't know that I necessarily like that.
But there are, some just, I was just thinking about some simple basic things, like typing was what girls did at school, whereas I just sit here picking like a chook at my keyboard thinking, if only I had learned how to type properly.
Exactly. Also in the news today, the example of Finland.
Yeah.
Which seems to customise... I know we hear about the Scandinavian models in all sorts of ways, but a report in media today about Finland, talked up for producing the highest global test scores in the Western world, as well as #1 global rankings, including literacy. In Finland, this is an article actually written by a visiting American professor who's fallen in love with what they do in school. Children don't receive formal academic training until 7, you may have known that.
Yep.
Most children walk or bike to school, even the youngest ones. School hours short, homework light. School children have 15 minutes every hour mandatorily outside. And a popular maxim among the Finns is there is no bad weather, only inadequate clothing. And that's quite an old-fashioned, personalised approach. They reckon the teachers in Finland, you know, are well paid and do fantastic jobs and look after you individually.
Because they're highly respected, and they do further education around the educational medium as well, which is great. It also said that they call them the personalised learning device ever created, flesh and blood teachers, which I thought was absolutely right. And when a teacher does take an interest and can take an interest and is respected like that, it's a remarkable thing. I don't think you can take away from the fact that education and learning is interesting, but the things that I remember and everyone I know is they remember specific teachers who looked after, who got them and said, I think this would be great for you, and sent you off down a tangent and played with you in an educational field. And that to me was the most remarkable thing. And if that's what they mean by specific learning and teaching that way, I'm all for it. But I don't know that that's necessarily what they mean.
I think they've got that in mind. Did you want a last word on that?
No, it's just Peter was stirring all sorts of memories in me and the great teachers that bought those little extra bits and pieces. But there's something to be said for a decent ratio and paying teachers properly so they can get in there, roll their sleeves up and get stuck in with these kids.
Absolutely.
And do we want ours online all the time? Because there's an awful lot of online now, isn't there? Homework, everything else.
No, I'd like to see them get off it.
Peter Elliott, Clark Gayford on the panel. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, everybody, for listening. John Campbell and Checkpoint come on the way.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell. On behalf of the Checkpoint team, thank you for joining us. Tonight, tax havens, is New Zealand one, and how does it all work? How big is the story? Serco, not long ago, they were, quote, exceptional. Now they're saying sorry and paying $8 million to corrections. Why? Peter Dunn approves the use of a non-pharmaceutical grade cannabis-based medicine. Why and where is this heading? He joins us live in about 15 minutes. Water, no one owns it, but in Ashburton it's for sale in huge quantities. To whom? And Lydia Ko, already #1 in the world, and she keeps getting better. Her coach joins us before 5:30, but before all of that, here is Katrina Batten with RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. The Prime Minister says New Zealand has a robust tax system and does not operate as a tax haven for wealthy foreigners. A massive leak of confidential documents has revealed how scores of the world's wealthy and political elite use Panamanian law firm Mossack Fonseca to set up tax havens, including in New Zealand. Opposition parties want the government to put a stop to foreign trusts being able to operate in secrecy. John Key rejects the suggestion New Zealand is a tax haven.
No. Tax havens are where there's non-disclosure of information. New Zealand has full disclosure of information, and so all you've got is a situation where New Zealand's taken a different view from a lot of jurisdictions, and that's because the way we tax is we tax a set law. In other words, it's all about making sure that New Zealanders pay their fair share of tax.
John Key says the OECD carried out a review of New Zealand's tax system in 2013 and gave it a clean bill of health. Serco, which has been fined millions of dollars for the way it ran Mount Eden Prison, says it struggled to handle a sudden influx of prisoners and was trying to get more staff before corrections took over. The department took control of the jail last July after allegations of drug use, assaults and organised fights. It will run the prison until Serco's contract ends in March next year and has ordered the company to pay $8 million for management costs and bonuses. Serco's Asia-Pacific Chief Executive, Mark Irwin, says it was struggling to cope with nearly 1,000 extra prisoners in New Zealand last year.
Those changes happened in a way that was both dramatic and fast, and we were trying to respond to all of those things and were in discussions with the department, as I said, when these issues emerged last year. So we were not blind to them, and we did not ignore them, we were actively trying to address them.
Mark Irwin says the company did fail its service obligations, and for that he's truly sorry. The police are talking to 2 young people over the death of a young woman in Otarahanga yesterday. Ocean Heke, who was 17 and from Tikawiti, was found dead on the roadside just north of the town at about 6:30 in the morning. A post-mortem indicates she was hit by a vehicle. The police say they've located a car that's undergoing forensic examination. The chair of the Ngāpuhi Treaty Settlement Body to Horonuku, Hone Sadler, is dismissing a new approach to its treaty settlement. A new report is pushing for the country's largest iwi, Ngāpuhi, to take a hapu-based approach to its negotiations with the government. A tribal working party has made the recommendations aimed at breaking the impasse which has held up negotiations for several years. Late last year, the Waitangi Tribunal found flaws in Te Horonuku's mandate. But Hone Sadler wasn't on the working party and says he doesn't agree with its plans.
In terms of a hapu involvement or hapu driven, with Te Horonuku they already have that because there are 15 members on that board who are hapu of a board of 22. My man saying, well, what's the difference?
Hone Sadler says Ngāpuhi members who live in the city could lose their say. Witnesses report that 2 passenger boats returning migrants to Turkey have set sail from the Greek island of Lesbos. Under a controversial European Union deal, migrants on Greek islands who haven't applied for asylum or have had their claims rejected will be ferried back across the sea to the Turkish mainland. Many of the migrants are on Lesbos, from where the BBC's Sarah Rainsford reports.
One report suggests that up to 750 people could leave by Wednesday. For the rest, Greece says each asylum application will take 2 weeks. Those rejected will then be sent back across the sea. But the timetable could well slip. The EU has been slow to deploy the support staff it promised, including asylum experts, interpreters and police officers. And in the meantime, hundreds of new arrivals reach the Greek coast every day.
Sarah Rainsford reporting. The Ministry of Justice is cutting about 100 jobs as it revamps how fines are collected. About half of its 200 or so collections officers will be kept on, but instead of manning counters at courts, they'll work from home. The ministry says that's become possible because most people now pay their fines online or over the phone. The Public Service Association says having workers with access to highly sensitive information working from home is a security risk. People will still be able to pay fines in person at a district court front counter. The women's world #1, New Zealander Lydia Ko, has created golfing history once again, becoming the youngest two-time winner of a major on the LPGA Tour. The 18-year-old birdied the final hole at the Mission Hills Country Club in California to win the ANA Inspiration event by one shot. She's the youngest golfer of either sex to win two majors since young Tom Morris, who won the Open in 1869. Following her round, Ko was full of emotion.
This has been a long week. I'm proud that I was able to make those clutch putts, especially on the back nine. But it's a pretty amazing feeling, and just to see the poppies pond, it's pretty surreal.
The win earns Ko $560,000. Go Lydia. The West Indies captain Darren Sammy says his World 2020 winning side were motivated by the disrespect of commentators and administrators. The Windies beat England by 4 wickets after Carlos Braithwaite hit 4 consecutive sixes in the final over to snatch victory. Man of the match, West Indies' Marlon Samuels was fined 30% of his match fee for abusing England all-rounder Ben Stokes.
He doesn't learn because they keep telling him whenever he played against me, do not speak to me because I'm going to perform. I didn't even face a ball and he has so much to say today. I played Test series in Australia and every team, Shane Warne has a problem with me. I've never disrespected, so I don't appreciate the way that he continued to talk about me, maybe because my face is real and his face is not.
The West Indies women's team also won their final. That's the news.
Victory for the West Indies.
It's jubilation here in Jamaica and around the rest of the Caribbean.
A doping scandal in Britain.
Obviously, some of these treatments I use are banned on the professional, circuit.
The Panama Papers.
These documents raise immense numbers of questions about who is responsible for moving money around the world and what are these leaders doing with this money.
Ways to play the game. Guy Aspinall and Susie Ferguson, Morning Reports, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, why expert panels are expanding the definitions of disease, and is it leading to unnecessary diagnosis of healthy people? And after 10, the remarkable true story of Englishwoman Grace Oakeshott, who faked her own death in 1907 so she could flee to New Zealand with her lover. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waitomo, also Coromandel. Scattered showers clearing this afternoon. They're mainly fine. However, isolated showers tomorrow with heavy falls possible about eastern Coromandel. Taupo, Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Showers, some possibly heavy with thunderstorms and hail today, becoming confined to Gisborne and northern Hawke's Bay early tomorrow. Taranaki and Taihape to Wellington, mostly cloudy with isolated showers, clearing tomorrow to fine weather. Wairarapa, Marlborough and Canterbury, scattered showers, clearing this evening, mainly fine tomorrow, but a chance of an afternoon shower in Wairarapa. Nelson and Bulla, cloudy periods and isolated showers. Westland, mainly fine, isolated afternoon showers tomorrow. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, fine, apart from a few showers about Fiordland and coastal parts of Southland and Clutha until tomorrow afternoon. The Chatham Islands, occasional rain, easing to a few showers this afternoon. It is bang on right now, 9 minutes past 5.
Exactly. Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Coming up before 5:30, Panama, tax havens and us. There are more than 12,000 offshore trusts registered in New Zealand. What are they doing? Lydia Ko's coach joins us to discuss her remarkable achievement, and Peter Dunn also joins us live to discuss a new medical cannabis product approved for use. But let's begin with Serco. The private prison operator is to pay $8 million to corrections after the government department took over the management of Mount Eden Prison in July of last year. You'll all remember that. The payment, which is the largest ever made to a government department by a company contracted to work for them, was accompanied by an apology. But for what exactly? Because while Serco is apologising and handing over money, it's also in the High Court disputing aspects of the report from the Chief Inspector of Corrections into their management of the Mount Eden Corrections facility. So what did Serco apologise and pay the $8 million for? To try to find out, I went along to the media conference held by Corrections Chief Executive Ray Smith, and the voice you'll hear answering first, the Chief Executive of Serco Asia Pacific, Mark Irwin. $8 million, you're writing out a cheque for $8 million to the...
Yes, we are, and we'll be paying that to the department in the next month.
$8 million?
Correct.
And was there negotiations? Did the Crown go after more initially? Did Corrections go after more initially? Was this an agreed figure that you settled on after a toing and froing? How was that reached?
Yes, so it was reached through a process of mediation, and ultimately, obviously, as a consequence of that, it was by mutual agreement.
And who was the mediator? Who did that work?
Well, I think in terms of mediation, those are processes that are kept pretty tight. We don't talk about what happens in those, which allows parties to be frank about what they think needs to be resolved. But what we have done, because we think it's in the public interest, is to be clear about what the outcome of that mediation was. So the $8 million figure, I'm very satisfied with. From my perspective, it settles up appropriately what was owed throughout this last period of the contract.
Okay, there's been lots of toing and froing and lots of frankness, and the decisions outlined are separate, it says, in the Minister's statement from the Chief Inspector of Corrections report into Serco management, which is currently before the courts. But you're standing here today admitting liability, telling us you're paying $8 million and apologising. So how are you still disputing the Chief Inspector's report? Why are you still before the courts? I mean, you're falling on your sword here today, aren't you?
What we've indicated through this agreement is a path forward to manage the prison through the remainder of the transition period. What I've apologised for today are those aspects of our service delivery which fell short of what we committed to deliver. The processes that are currently before the court are independent of this and does not affect this agreement.
But they relate to exactly the same events, aren't they? I mean, you're paying $8 million. Effectively, it's a fine for exactly the same events, but you're still disputing the Chief Inspector's report before the courts. It seems very odd.
We've made clear that the payments made today are in relation to the department's step-in costs. As you heard Ray say before, they are in relation to performance notices, which are a normal part of the contractual management relationship that we have with the department, and any other contractual monies that we're owing to the department. What is before the courts is consideration of the process that was undertaken to ultimately conclude on that report, and I think we need to be respectful of those processes.
But why did the department have to step in?
It was the department's decision at the time to step in.
But you're admitting, aren't you, that it was the right decision? You're apologising. You're paying them $8 million. Why did they have to step in?
It was not our decision. It was the department's decision, and we are contractually working for the department, so we respected that decision.
Okay, but you respected the decision to the extent that you're paying them $8 million. So clearly, it was the right decision.
We paid them $8 million because as a consequence of that decision, they did incur those costs, and we believe it's the right thing to reimburse those costs.
When this all expires in March 2017, are you going to bid for the contract again?
We don't know. We don't know whether this will come to market again. That's a decision for government, and once that decision is made, we will assess at that point.
Are you clearing the waters here so you can re-tender for the contract?
As I said, we don't know what will happen in terms of the future.
But someone's got to run the prison, right?
Yes.
I want to be careful about the fact that Mark has acknowledged that there are things that they wish they had done better in this prison.
What are they, specifically? What do you wish you'd done better?
Again, I can't go to the details of that at this point until the inspectors.
Except this is really eccentric, isn't it? You're paying $8 million. You're standing here apologising and falling on your sword, but you won't say specifically what you did wrong.
Only in order to be respectful to those processes. Obviously, as soon as those processes have been concluded,
but you're appealing the process,
we will be speaking.
But there's no respect for that. You have no respect whatsoever for the Chief Inspector's report. You've taken it to the High Court. You're appealing it. I mean, this is an odd way of displaying respect. Isn't this about relationship building with Ray and Corrections?
It is, but it's also about following due process. And in terms of the Chief Inspector's report, we've made clear in our appeal to the High Court the basis for that. It is not related to the report as it's finally presented, but in relation to the processes that were undertaken to get there. That's as much as I can say at this point, for the reasons that these matters are still before the court.
That was the Chief Executive of Serco for the Asia Pacific region, Mark Irwin. Also at that media conference was the Head of Corrections, Ray Smith. Corrections Minister Judith Collins is on the phone now. Minister, thank you for joining us. Nice to have you on the program. Is it possible that Serco might end up running Mount Eden again?
Well, these things always have to be decided, but it has previously been run when it was the Auckland Central Remand Prison by Geo, which is a private operator. They did really well from 2000 to 2005. We've always chosen not to rule out providers because we always think you've got to look at these on the facts and what you know at the time. So it's Serco's currently running the prison at South Auckland,
Wirri.
the big men's prison at Wirri, and I tell you, I've been to visit it, John. All the reports I'm getting, the local people are telling me it's a really well-run prison.
Can we talk about Mount Eden specifically? It is possible then, you're saying, that they might end up running it again.
There's everything.
Okay. It is.
It's looked
Okay.
at. But I'd say that it's always possible that they might wish to tender, but I don't know that that's going to happen.
Okay, Minister, I'm going to quote you from your own media statement when you announced that Serco had the contract in December 2010. You said at the time, the appointment of Serco will bring in new ideas and international best practice which will benefit the entire corrections sector. Today they are apologising and paying corrections $8 million. Has it worked out as you hoped it would in the specific case of Mount Eden?
Well, I think in this specific case, it was working out very well, according to all the reports, for some time, for a vast majority of the time. But clearly, near the end of that contract, it did not work out.
Do you know when things started to go off the rails? Because I have the prison performance table from March 2015, right? The year end March 2015. There are 3 measures for Mount Eden. They're rated top of the table, exceptional, exceptional, exceptional. Now, by that stage, the behaviour for which they paid $8 million today was already well underway. In other words, were corrections simply not alert to it?
Well, I think that's one of the matters that are subject to that Chief Inspector's report. And one of the problems is that I really can't comment on that. I think this will all become clear once the court processes have been completed.
You've read the Chief Inspector's report, haven't you?
I have.
And what do you think of it? Now, I'm not asking you what's in it, but what do you think of it?
Well, I can't even comment on that given that it's subject to a judicial review, but I can tell you that I have read it. And I'm sure that will be very interesting reading for all of us who are, who care about this issue.
Salutary in terms of contracting Mount Eden out, because Mark Irwin himself is saying this is a difficult prison. Remand, high turnover, short stays. A difficult prison, he was himself saying today. Do you think it was the right prison to give to Serco?
Look, I'm sorry, but this is just ridiculous to blame issues on it being a remand prison. Remand prisons have been very successfully run and are run in Australia and elsewhere and in New Zealand.
So why hasn't that been the case here? Why are they paying corrections $8 million and apologising for whatever it is specifically that went wrong?
Well, they're not paying the money for what went wrong. They're paying the money because of the contractual obligations from a step-in, the cost of that corrections have incurred, and they're paying for the performance issues since then. So it's not as though it's a payment that's because of particular behaviours. What's happened is a consequence of the step-in and their own failures to complete all of their contracts. So I say is that wait till the report comes out. I think it will be very clear exactly what's gone on and where the problems lay. But this sort of thing can happen and failures happen in senior management in the public prisons as well. And there are several prisons in New Zealand where senior staff and management have been taken out and new ones put in. So it is not something that's just about Serco. It's not something that's just about a private provider. It happens in the public estate as well, I'm sorry to say.
Minister, when the report comes out, will you come on the program? We can discuss it then?
You know I will, John.
Thank you. Judith Collins, Corrections Minister, I thoroughly look forward to it. It's 19 minutes past 5. Coming up, the Associate Health Minister, Peter Dunn, who I think is standing by on the phone to join us, approves Accesco Calm. It's a cannabis-based product used as a spray to treat severe cases of Tourette's syndrome. New Zealand's linked to overseas tax havens. What is going on here and how does all of this work? We've got the political reaction and some interpretation. And Lydia Ko becomes the youngest golfer since 1869 to win back-to-back majors. We speak to her coach, David Ledbetter. He is a pretty experienced man, worked with some of the greats, and he is saying she is extraordinary. All of that's coming up in the next 10 minutes. We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. You can text us on 2101 or email checkpoint@radioNZ.co.nz. Plus, don't forget our excellent Facebook page. 20 minutes past 5, the Associate Health Minister Peter Dunn has approved another cannabis-based product for use, this time to treat a severe case of Tourette's. Accesso Calm Spray is non-pharmaceutical grade, which makes it different from Sativex, and we'll discuss that, which means the Minister himself has to give approval for it to be described. The product has to meet a series of checks to gain approvals, checks which are currently being reviewed. Peter Dunn joins us on the line now. Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it.
That's all right, John. Good evening.
Good evening. Boy, this is moving along, isn't it? This is a new one, and I want to put it on the table that you're delighted to be able to approve this. Are you?
Oh, I'm pleased because the application was a good one. It ticked all the boxes. It was recommended by the Director of Mental Health and the Acting Director of Public Health, and it was a pretty easy decision to make.
Okay, what made it easy? What boxes does this product tick?
Well, I don't want to go into the patient's individual details.
Absolutely.
But in respect of the condition that the patient was suffering from, this was assessed by both their consultant psychiatrists and medical advisors to be the best potential product. The information that was provided to the Ministry of Health relating to the product and its capabilities and content was pretty clear. And on that basis, those two senior officials felt able to recommend to me that the product should be approved for this particular patient.
Okay, Minister, you say the application was comprehensive, innovative and considered. I'm interested in the innovative bit. How is an application...
It was innovative in that it proposed a different solution to a problem that particular patient was suffering from. And it was able to demonstrate to the clinical advisors that the particular product, Accesso, was going to achieve the benefits that the patient was seeking.
Okay, is that a how-to guide? In other words, if we go back to those words, the application was comprehensive, innovative and considered. Are you effectively saying, ladies and gentlemen, hit me with a comprehensive, innovative and considered application, and I'm going to say yes?
What I'm saying is that if an application is lodged, it has the support of the patient's medical advisors. They have provided adequate descriptions of the product, its toxicity, its dose, its level of CBD or THC, etc., and can demonstrate the likely efficacy of the patient of the preparation for the patient, then that will be considered, and I will get a clinical recommendation, presumably to support it, or if it's not considered to be adequate, to not support it.
But it does seem that on the basis of what you're saying here, an application along these lines, and there are criteria, there are boxes that have to be ticked.
That's right.
That these are increasingly going to be approved.
Well, there have been two cases have come to my attention in the last year. Both of them have been approved.
You know, when we had a really fascinating, I think, broader brushstroke interview about the bigger issues attached to this a couple of weeks ago, and you said, look, we will see the use of medical cannabis in New Zealand within 2 years. Actually, it's going to happen faster than that, isn't it?
I don't resolve from what I said then, because the same conditions still apply until there are products that have been satisfactorily tested, that are clinically registered here. Then the situation remains as it is. I can't truncate that process because it's not occurring within New Zealand. But I think that what we will see, and we may see more cases of the type that I've seen today. But I just want to make this point, John. Every case is dealt with on its merits. The fact that this decision has been made today carries no weight at all in terms of the next application that might come in. In other words, the patient's medical advisors have to satisfy, first of all, the clinicians in the ministry, and then they have to recommend to me that an application be approved. There's no sort of precedent setting here, or no sense that, because this one got through, the next ones for different patients with similar conditions will automatically get through either. Each case is on its merits.
Peter Dunn, Associate Health Minister, we appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. 24 minutes past 5. The Prime Minister has mounted a defence of New Zealand's tax system, rejecting any suggestion it acts as an international tax haven. A massive leak of confidential documents has revealed how 70 current and former heads of state had used tax havens, some to launder money, dodge sanctions and evade tax. The Australian newspaper reports that New Zealand trusts have been set up by companies owned by Mossack Fonseca in Panama, with a Dubai account for senior government figures in Malta. Opposition parties are calling for the government to take urgent action and to put a stop to these trusts being able to operate in secrecy here. Here is our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The leaked documents detail the assets of at least 140 international figures, including associates of the Russian President Vladimir Putin, the football superstar Lionel Messi and scores of Forbes' rich list billionaires. But it's the connection to New Zealand registered trusts that has piqued the interest of politicians here. The Labour Party leader Andrew Little says the Prime Minister should disclose how long he's been aware New Zealand is becoming a favoured investment location for wealthy individuals wanting to hide their money and avoid tax, and he says the government should close any tax loopholes.
If we're being billed around the world as a safe place to have these dodgy trusts and to avoid tax, that is not good for New Zealand and our reputation, and we need to know what the Prime Minister knows and what the government is going to do about it.
The Greens finance spokesperson Julianne Genter says Inland Revenue has warned the government about the risks of non-resident trusts. She says these trusts can operate under a high level of secrecy, which could be addressed by stricter obligations.
The government can easily stop allowing the foreign trust industry to operate in secret by requiring more complete information on the identity of the settlers, their country of residence, and related parties, and require annual financial reporting.
The Prime Minister John Campbell says the OECD carried out a review of New Zealand's tax system in 2013 and gave it what he describes as a clean bill of health. He rejects the suggestion New Zealand is a tax haven.
No. Tax havens are where there's non-disclosure of information. New Zealand has full disclosure of information, and so all you've got is a situation where New Zealand's taken a different view from a lot of jurisdictions, and that's because the way we tax is we tax a set law. In other words, it's all about making sure that New Zealanders pay their fair share of tax. What we've got is quite a legitimate regime.
He says New Zealand acts within the law, which has been tested by international organisations.
It was reviewed by the OECD and given a clean bill of health. B, we've implemented FACTA and also implementing the OECD's common reporting standard for automatic exchange of financial account information. We observe the anti-money laundering rules.
In a statement, the IRD says it's working closely with New Zealand's tax treaty partners to obtain full details of any New Zealanders who may have been involved with Mossack Fonseca. It says it has compliance systems in place to flush out those who use the trusts to hide their wealth. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
We are going to talk about this more with a tax expert after 6 o'clock. How does this work and what are all those foreign trusts doing in New Zealand? That's after 6. How good is Lydia Ko, world number 1, aged 18? And today the golfer, who was already the youngest woman ever to win a major, became the youngest person, male or female, to win back-to-back majors since 1869. Younger than Jack Nicklaus, younger than Arnold Palmer, younger than Tiger Woods. Ko's come from behind victory in California today was special because she was one of 4 tied for the lead as she went into the 18th, and yes, she birdied that last hole. Her coach David Ledbetter, who's worked with Nick Faldo, with Greg Norman and with Ernie Earls, says the young New Zealander is shaping up to be one of golf's all-time greats.
Absolutely unbelievable. Certainly winning Evian last year was incredible, but to follow it up, winning last week, but following up winning this week, I told her at the beginning of the week, John, I said, listen, this is your tournament to win. You need to go out and win this tournament. And that's exactly what she did today. Nobody gave it to her today. She struggled somewhat. She didn't have her best stuff with her, as they say, but she did what she had to do. And when it came down to the clutch time, she hit this amazing shot on the last hole, and it was just absolutely incredible. And she's just destined to be one of the greats. You can just see it now. If we can keep her away from injuries and keep her passion for it, which I don't think is going to be a problem. She's just got a remarkable temperament for the game. She's just one of a kind. And but what else can you say?
Have you ever seen anyone like her before in terms of her ability and her psychological predisposition, her composure, for example?
I honestly haven't. Look, I was very much involved in the Tiger era, having worked with Ernie Els, obviously a peer of Tiger's, and I knew closely what Tiger was doing and what he was going through, and you can only you can only put it down to sort of a Tiger-esque type performance. Very different individuals, obviously, but just the fact that she just does what she has to do when she has to do it. I mean, and nothing really phases her, and that's the amazing thing. I mean, look, she looked like she was down and out with a few holes to play, but she just hung in there, and obviously the pressure got to Miss Chitanagan, and Lydia was just, it was just one of those performances where, as I said to her, I said, you're going to win tournaments like this where you haven't got your best stuff, and this is going to be great for the future because one tends to think, well, you have to play great golf the whole time, but it's a case of hanging in there, holding the putts when you need to, hitting the shots at the right time, and my goodness, didn't she do that on the last hole?
Yes, she did. It's extraordinary because there was 4 tied for the lead, right, when Lydia entered the 18th. And Lydia looks up the leaderboard and thinks, gosh, I'm 1 of 4. Now, not long before that, she was 2 shots down. And so her response to that is to birdie the last. Now, that does speak of someone who has the most extraordinary composure. I wish I could think of another word, but that is just deep in her, isn't it?
It just speaks volumes about her as an individual and what she's got inside of her. I think when she's sort of a savant. I mean, that's really what she is. I mean, it's the only way to describe her. She's just one of those people who have this unbelievable talent, who really probably don't even know why they have this talent. I mean, it's a God-given gift that she has that is able to come out and to be able to perform at the highest level. I mean, you've seen that through the decades, and whether you go back to Jack Nicklaus or whoever, the fact is that when the chips are down, when the old saying is when the going gets tough, the tough get going, and that's exactly what Lydia did today.
David, we so appreciate your time. One final question, and it's awful to tempt fate, and it's awful to try and look into the crystal ball ever in sport. But gosh, the Olympics are an exciting prospect, aren't they, for Lydia Ko, and for you, and for everyone associated with her?
Absolutely. I think that she's talking about the Olympics a lot more now. I think it's at the back of her mind that, look, this is obviously the first time for eons that the golf has been played in the Olympics, and who knows how long it's going to be played. Hopefully it'll be played for many a year. But yes, absolutely. I think this would be something that she's definitely vying for. She knows it's an important international meet. I mean, we look at tournaments and we know that for the most part they're from an individual standpoint, but she knows she's playing for her country, and she loves New Zealand, and she's a great role model and ambassador for New Zealand. I don't think there's anything more that she'd like to do than just win a gold medal for New Zealand.
That was David Ledbetter, Lydia Ko's coach. 5:33, Katrina Batten is sitting beside me. I'm sorry that the news headlines are late, Katrina, but the first half hour's been big. Coming up in the second half hour of the program, a report into the Dunedin balcony collapse during a 660 concert last month revealed that it did so because it was overloaded. Ashburn residents, they're outraged the council is selling the right to extract billions of litres of water to a bottled water company. We're trying to find out more about this deal. Plus, IRD reaps the benefits of student loan awareness following the border arrest. You'll remember this, the man whose student loan debt got him caught at the border. Well, since then, IRD's recovered $7 million in student loan payments just in January and February. That is coming up. Also, Panama, tax evasion, all of that after 6. But first, here is, better late than never, Katrina Batten with the headlines.
The Prime Minister says New Zealand has a robust tax system and does not operate as a tax haven for wealthy foreigners. A massive leak of documents has revealed how scores of the world's wealthy and political elite used a Panamanian law firm to set up tax havens, including in New Zealand. Opposition parties want the government to prevent foreign trusts from being able to operate in secrecy. But John Campbell says the OECD gave the tax system a clean bill of health in 2013. Serco says it struggled to handle an influx of nearly 1,000 extra prisoners in New Zealand last year and was trying to get more staff before corrections took over running Mount Eden Prison. The department took control of the jail last July after allegations of drug use, assaults and organised fights. The police are talking to 2 young people over the death of 17-year-old Ocean Heke in Otarahanga yesterday. A post-mortem indicates she was hit by a vehicle, and the police say a car they've located is undergoing forensic examination. The Associate Health Minister has approved a cannabis-based product to help treat a patient with a severe case of Tourette's syndrome. Peter Dunn says Assesco Calm Spray was chosen for its low THC content and approved after a comprehensive and considered application by the patient's medical consultant. The Ministry of Justice is cutting about 100 jobs as it revamps how fines are collected. About half of its approximately 200 collections officers will be kept on, but instead of manning counters at courts, they'll work from home. The Ministry says it's become possible because most people pay their fines online or over the phone. The Dunedin City Council says a code that regulates building consents for balconies is too weak for high-density areas like North Dunedin, and the government should consider lifting it. A report into a balcony collapse in a student precinct there in March, in which 18 people were injured, has found it was caused by overloading. Those are the headlines. We'll be back at 6 with more news, sport and weather.
And I promise we'll be on time because the Pips rule.
Yeah, they do,
They
John.
own it. They own the slot. Thank you, Katrina Batten. Turning to business now with Jonathan Mitchell. Jonathan, we often talk about employers and owners, but tonight we're talking about workers and they're feeling more confident about the labour market.
That's right. Well, that was a key theme to come out of the Westpac McDermott Miller Employment Confidence Survey today, John. There are a number of factors behind that, I think, and you have to go back to the end of last year when we had the unemployment data out. It sort of fell quite surprisingly from 6% to 5.3%. That was the lowest level since 2009. So that sort of had a flow-on effect in confidence into the first 3 months of 2016. Then you've got those monthly job ads that come through from RNZ every month, showing an uptick in job advertisements online and in newspapers in certain parts of the country. So that's flowing through into the data. And Westpac says, who did the survey, says in response to that confidence, it suggests, employment growth is ticking along quite nicely and there's quite a lot of weight behind the labour market at the moment. But I guess there's something flowing through which is quite interesting, is that urban-rural divide and guesses for what's happening in the rural sector, and that's wheat dairy prices weighing on confidence. Some areas which fell include Taranaki, Manawatu and Whanganui. And Westpac says that divide is certainly clear when people are talking about employment prospects in the months to come. They're obviously not certain whether they're going to have their jobs or able to employ. So that's a long-term thing. But that urban-rural divide is an interesting term which came out today and certainly highlights that people in the cities are feeling more confident than their rural counterparts.
Yeah, if you look at those regions that you say were down, Taranaki, Manawatu and Whanganui, they're all big dairy regions, obviously.
And big falls there, John, actually quite big falls.
Yeah. What regions were looking more positive, more optimistic, up in other words?
That's right. Well, Hawke's Bay and Gisborne, actually, the east coast of the North Island. You may remember that Hawke's Bay is coming through in quite a few indicators at the moment, including those job ads, those monthly job ads. And Hawke's Bay, I guess, is just feeling the benefits of increase in house prices. That Auckland effect is flowing down the country and demand for houses is coming through and the prices are rising. Tourism, booming tourism at the moment, that's helping Hawke's Bay. And in the rural sense, viticulture and horticulture. So that's a bright spot for employee confidence in the moment. But in terms of the long-term outlook, Westpac just points out like the first half of this year is likely to be quite strong, but the second half could be a different story. And that's if the economy slows. And that'll be one to watch, and that could bite into confidence in the second half of the year. So we're just going to have to watch and see on that.
Thanks, Jonathan. What happened to the markets just quickly before you go?
Up slightly, John, today, 0.5%, 36 points to 6744. And that dollar is still quite elevated at high levels, 68.77 US cents, and hovering just recently around 90 Australian.
Jonathan Mitchell from Wellington, thank you so much. Our excellent business team has Week About on the program, and it's Jonathan's Week Out of Wellington. Ashburton residents are outraged the local council is in the process of selling the right to extract billions of litres of water to a bottled water company. The Ashburton District Council is selling Lot 9 in its business estate, which comes with a resource consent to extract up to 45 litres of water per second from the town's aquifers. But local residents are rallying together and say they will do everything they can to stop the sale going ahead. Sally Murphy reports.
The consents attached to Lot 9 would allow the company to extract up to 45 litres per second right through until 2046. Local resident Jennifer Brunya is leading the campaign to stop the sale going ahead. She says the council has been doing the deal behind closed doors and has not once had a conversation with ratepayers.
My main concern is that we live in a drought-prone area. Our water supplies are under enormous stress already, and there's no guarantee that we're going to have a continued water supply for ourselves, let alone allowing a foreign investor to come in and take what we do have.
Ms Brunya says concerned locals held a meeting last week and will meet again tonight to discuss ways to protest the sale.
As you know, water in New Zealand is free. Nobody actually pays for the water. So once these investors have bought Lot 9 in Ashburton Industrial Estate, their financial obligation to us, our country and our economic situation is null and void. They don't owe us anything. They've bought the land, they've got the consent, so nothing economic comes good into our Ashburton district.
She says as an individual she can't do much to stop the sale, but locals are rallying together and looking at different legal channels to do so.
That's our land. That is, as ratepayers, that is our land. Our rates paid for the development of it. We all have a stakeholder in that land. And for it to be sold off behind our backs to something that we don't agree with is absolutely abhorrent.
District Mayor Angus Mackay says there is also a recharge consent. So for every 45 litres taken, 60 litres will have to be put back into the aquifer. That water comes from canals that are fed from the Ashburton River.
Comes from our water race system that's going to be set up in the future as part of a natural habitat. It'll flow into a shingle pit that's lined with native plants, so it will be the same cleanliness as the aquifer water.
He says there are no plans to build the gravel pit which would filter the water, but it would have to be done before the company starts operating from the site. Mr Mackay says the council has the public's best interests at heart as the sale of the site goes towards rates remissions.
I don't believe they understand the limits that the Regional Council has put in place over the years, the minimum flows on the river or the amount that can be taken from aquifers. Unfortunately, I don't believe they understand that properly, and that actually upsets me that people don't realise that quite stringent, in fact very stringent, restrictions and limits are in place now.
The local iwi Ngāi Tahu were not aware of the consents but say they're looking into it. In a statement, Ngāi Tahu Chair Mark Solomon says it is incredible that the council would not think more broadly about the consents in an already over-allocated catchment.
20 years ago, the Ashburton region had reasonably good water quality, but it is now an over-allocated catchment and faces some of the most pressing water quality challenges in our tribal region. We think it's time for the Ashburton District Council to take account of the shift towards more participatory resource planning.
Environmental Defence Society Chair Gary Taylor says the issue is a storm in a teacup, and the real question is whether there should be a price put on water.
I think it should be, and it's a common pool resource. Nobody owns it. It would be entirely appropriate for people who use the resource without charge to pay something, and for that money to go into a clean-up fund.
Mr Taylor says if water was paid for, the money should go to the government.
It would be moving towards ownership rights but not creating them, and it's certainly better than the current system that we've got, which is no charge and therefore waste doesn't face any kind of penalty.
The Ashburton District Council would not disclose the potential buyer for Lot 9 due to commercial sensitivity, but says it expects to confirm the sale by June. For Checkpoint, Sally Murphy.
So, as Sally pointed out, Ashburton is essentially selling its water. It's doing that by selling the land on top of the water, and with that you get the rights to extract it. But do councils actually own the water within their region? The Prime Minister, John Campbell, doesn't think so. We spoke to him about this recently.
Well, the well-established position, as articulated by both government and Crown law, is that nobody owns water.
Nobody owns water because no one owns it. It means companies like Coca-Cola can take it, bottle it and sell it for a huge profit, effectively without paying for it at all. John Campbell says while councils can't technically sell water, there are other benefits to letting companies take it.
So it's about allocation rights and whether a company can actually get those allocation rights, and every council has a different set of rules that govern that. But I mean, if a company, for instance, gets water, has access to it through its allocation rights, and therefore goes and bottles it, it does create a huge amount of employment, and it sits exactly alongside that principle that nobody owns water. People can use it, just depends who's got the allocation rights.
So does the Prime Minister think councils should have more power to charge money for water?
In my view, no. I mean, it's for councils to decide how they allocate the water, and they do that. In some catchments, it's fully allocated, and they go through a process every time they renew those. In some catchments, it's not.
The Prime Minister, John Key. It's coming up to 5:45. Students overloading. Should we have a sting? Just for the sheer joy of the sting. It's a nice little moment to breathe in and out. Students overloading the balcony of a Castle Street property was the cause of its collapse last month at a 660 concert, not building non-compliance. 18 people were injured too seriously when the balcony caved in during the gig at a property with student flats on Castle Street. This afternoon, the Dunedin City Council released its report, which found the key issue was the event itself, not the building, and that it wasn't a suitable location for so many people. The report suggested that stronger loading standards be introduced for balconies, particularly in student areas, which would require a law change. The properties in the student area are largely investor-owned. Joining us now is the president of the Otago Property Investors Association, Wendy Bauman. Wendy, thank you for joining us. Have you seen this Dunedin City Council report, and what do you make of it?
Yes, thank you, John. Yes, I have seen it this afternoon. I'm pleased that the report has come out very quickly after the event. It gives us confidence that the laws were adhered to by our investors, although obviously by looking at the report there could be some changes coming up with MB changing the laws to strengthen those rules. So I'm just waiting to see what happens there.
OK, the letter of the law was adhered to, right, by your investors, and that's all that's required of anyone. But I just wonder, given the way you know and I know and most of our listeners know Dunedin student life works, if there needs to be more rigour and more strength around the building of things like balconies on student flats.
Absolutely. We always have to look at, what's happening in the university area, and it is so dense down there with the students living, within about 7 blocks of each other. So we do have to always look at how we can change to make the building safe, because obviously we don't want our students to be hurt. And, we were devastated when that happened to the flat down in Castle Street, and it possibly also highlights that any events around the university in future maybe need to be controlled a little bit better.
Yeah, although I don't think did anyone know this was happening? It sort of had a life of its own, this event, didn't it?
Yes, it did, unfortunately. However, hopefully we can learn from this and make it better for when it happens, or if it happens again next time.
So if the council comes back to you and says, hey, look, we probably pragmatically need stronger standards, how would you and the people you represent feel about that?
Well, look, we have to keep the people safe. That's the most important part, is keeping our tenants safe. So if that's the way it is, then, we will have to adhere to the rules. And then it's up to the building owners whether they would like to have balconies or whether they maybe,
Okay.
not put balconies on properties.
Okay, so in theory, you are absolutely open to discussions. Do you think you'll be consulted?
Yes, I think we will be. The DCC have said that they will talk to us, and I've got a meeting with the university stakeholders on Thursday, and I'm sure that event will be on top of the agenda. Okay, we look forward to hearing what happens. Wendy Bauman, thank you so much for your time. Wendy is the president of the Otago Property Investors Association. Inland Revenue have seen an increase in student loan repayments, staying with the student theme, from people living overseas after a man was arrested at the border in January for failing to pay his debt. Inland Revenue had a 31% increase in repayments in January and February from people based overseas compared with the same months last year. Tom Furley reports.
There are some real horror stories when it comes to student loans. New Zealand expat Maria Dunn, who is 42, left for the US with a $12,000 loan in 1996 after completing a degree in sociology. She left with the understanding that her father was paying it off. Now based in Brisbane, she says when her partner received a call about his loan around 2 years ago, she decided to check hers had been repaid, only to find it hadn't, and had skyrocketed to $50,000.
At that stage, we had just had baby number 4, and we were single income, and it was very, very, very stressful. It took us to the brink of kind of losing the plot there. We really didn't know what to do.
Maria Dunn and her family had to move in with her mother and rely on family help to pay off the debt quickly so as not to further add an additional $3,000 annual interest to what was owed.
Had I known, there's no way that I would have let my debt accumulate that amount. We would have made efforts to have paid it off years and years ago had I even had a clue that it hadn't been sorted out.
In January, Cook Islands teacher Natuku Torupuna was arrested at Auckland Airport for failing to repay tens of thousands of dollars in student loan debt. Inland Revenue believes the publicity around the arrest is the motivation behind an additional 20,000 repayments at the start of this year compared with last year. Loan repayments in January and February this year were $7 million more than the same period in 2015. Christina Anderson, a director of Tax Hub, which operates the debt advice website studentloan.org.nz, says the arrest of defaulters policy is working.
We saw a dramatic increase in people wanting to sort out their student loan debt problems and to make repayments if they could manage to do so as a result of the arrest. We had a significant increase in our workload, and that is the reason we believe that was behind it.
But Christina Anderson says the concern about paying it back might not last.
Some of it will die down, although I think that the baseline level of concern and prompting to do something about your student loan debt problem, the baseline I think now is going to be higher than it was before the arrest, but I think over time, assuming no further arrests, the concern will dwindle away, perhaps more towards where it was last year.
The Minister for Tertiary Education, Skills and Employment, Stephen Joyce, says it's a pity it's taken an arrest to encourage people to meet their obligations. He says 70% of the over 100,000 overseas-based borrowers are currently in default. 20 people are being actively monitored by Inland Revenue for possible arrest when they return to New Zealand. Expat Maria Dunn says while she wasn't prompted into paying her debt off by the arrest, New Zealanders in Australia have become more conscious of repaying their loan.
I'm just glad that there's more awareness out there, and I hope the IRD will, just be fair.
For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
3 Taranaki men have received home detention for causing the death of a Hawera grandmother after they deliberately blocked State Highway 3 with metal barriers. Christine Ann Fairweather was hit and killed by a car as she attempted to move the barriers on the main route between Normanby and Hawera in August 2014. 19-year-old Samuel Lance Hawkins, 21-year-old Daniel George Gavin and Jason Campbell, who's 18, were sentenced in the High Court in Plymouth today. They pleaded guilty to manslaughter in February. Justice Matthew Moore gave discounts for the trio's early guilty plea and their youth and sentenced them to between 7 and 12 months home detention plus 100 hours of community work. Now, speaking outside the court, Christine's sister Diane Coleman said the verdicts were to be expected.
Nothing's going to bring her back. So the sentencing to a degree was irrelevant. The fact that they have manslaughter charges is going to be difficult for them to live with, which is kind of sad in a lot of ways. She would have forgiven them, as we all have, really, because that's the only way we can continue. The restorative justice process was probably more than what I thought it would be. I've had dealings with restorative justice through youth justice in my work. I have to say the facilitator Pamela and Delwyn did an amazing job of running the restorative justice conferences, and although the two didn't totally go how you might have wanted them to, it certainly was a wonderful opportunity for the families to have a voice.
That is the victim's sister, Diane Coleman, who said the applications of the men's actions have been far-reaching. I understand that as a teenager that we deal with risky behaviour and that's part of growing up, but, oh gosh, the whole thing was never ever going to end happily. There was never ever going to be a good outcome. I can't imagine a more stupid thing to do, and I guess they do. They probably are going to pay the price for the rest of their lives. And certainly, Daniel said he thinks about it every day, and I guess that's it. They have to live with it. Probably the hardest thing next to that is that the driver, Jeff Hart, has a conviction himself.
and from my perspective, did nothing wrong. Tried to save her. It was not his fault, and I'm just gutted that he ended up in court.
That's Christine Fairweather's sister, Diane Coleman, speaking outside the court in New Plymouth earlier today. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 6. The Crown says, 5 minutes to 6. The Crown says 2 teenagers accused of murder sent text messages to each other planning to beat and rob their victim so badly he'd end up in hospital. Leonard Natras Berquist and Bowen Wallace-Loretz are on trial at the High Court in Auckland, charged with murdering 54-year-old Ihaya Gilman Harris. Our Auckland court reporter Edward Gay is covering the trial and he joins me now. Edward, forgive me, is it day one today?
It is day one.
Okay, great, thank you. The plan was carried out behind Mr Gilman Harris's back.
That's right, yeah. The Crown prosecutor, David Johnston, said that plan was carried out behind Gilman Harris's back, figuratively and literally. He said that Mr Gilman Harris was driving the boys across Auckland in his Range Rover, and the boys were planning this attack by text messaging each other while they're in the car.
Sitting in the back of the car.
That's right. And he read some of these text messages out, and Mr Natras Berquist allegedly sent a text to Mr Wallace-Loretz saying, "Gee, should we roll him?" Mr Wallace-Loretz responded by saying, "Yeah, how bad you want?" And that got a response saying hard out. That they said that Mr Wallace-Loretz said, "Want it to be in hospital? Yeah, gee, all day." Mr Johnston said that the 2 boys later left the unit only 13 minutes inside this unit with Mr Gilman Harris. They left with his wallet, his cash, and they took his car, which was later found in Papakura, near where one of the boys was living. Mr Gilman Harris sort of stumbled out of his unit. He was found by motel staff. Right. And he died later in hospital. And Mr Johnson said that evidence will show that the boys planned the robbery. They brought a bat with them, at least a bat, maybe another weapon. And photos of that hotel room were also shown to the jury today. You know, they show a broken pedestal fan, a broken coffee table, and pretty extensive blood staining throughout the small unit.
Okay, boy, that's tough stuff for the jury. The defence is saying what in response, Edward?
Well, Murray Gibson, he's a defence lawyer. He's saying that Mr Gilman Harris was essentially a predator. He said that Mr Gilman Harris had met the boys earlier that month. He had been supplying alcohol and cigarettes, and he'd propositioned Mr Natras Berquist offering money to do a sex act earlier that day. He said that Mr Gilman Harris used his late father's address when booking the hotel room, and he told staff that he had a couple of nephews with him who were on their way to a concert, and we obviously know that's not correct.
Okay, what is Murray Gibson, the defence lawyer, saying happened inside that motel room? So the presence in the motel room is not in dispute, it's the interpretation of what the events were?
That's right, it comes down to these 13 minutes. Mr Gibson says that inside the hotel room, Mr Gilman Harris opened up his laptop and he played the boys a pornographic film, but Mr Natras Berquist showed no interest and he actually slammed this laptop closed. Mr Gibson said while Mr Wallace-Loretz was in the loo, Mr Gilman Harris actually sexually assaulted Mr Natras Berquist and pushed him onto the bed, and the boys were actually acting in self-defence. And Mr Gibson said his client was 17 years old at the time, he was holding down 2 jobs, had no previous convictions.
Edward Gay, our court reporter, this is obviously unfolding and we will have more reports from you. Thanks so much, Edward. Just before we go to the news at 6 o'clock, it's been a full-on 58 and a half minutes, so let's just have some nonsense escapism from Hong Kong, where a product and graphic designer called Ricky Ma has built a robot. It's not that interesting, but he's modelled it on Hollywood actor Scarlett Johansson, and he did it in his spare time on the balcony of his home. Go figure.
Meet Mark 1, a female robot built by Hong Kong man Ricky Ma. It's modelled after a famous Hollywood actress, but Ma doesn't want to say who. Mark 1 can respond to a set of pre-programmed questions.
Mark 1, you are very beautiful.
Thank you.
Mark 1, you are so cute.
Yeah, thank you. Ma spent a year and a half and more than $50,000 to make it from scratch.
When I was a child, I liked robots. Why? Because I liked watching animation. All children loved it. There were Transformers, cartoons about robots fighting each other, and games about robots. After I grew up, I wanted to make one. But during this process, a lot of people would say things like, "Are you stupid? This takes a lot of money. Do you even know how to do it? It's really hard."
Ma used 3D printing technology to make its skeleton, skin and body, but the process wasn't entirely smooth sailing. Electric motors burnt out and Mark I sometimes toppled over. Ma hopes he can sell this prototype to build more and wants to write a book about his experience to help other robot enthusiasts.
Katrina and I are still taken aback by Scarlett Johansson. Anyway, you're with Checkpoint on RNZ Nationals. Lovely to have you with us. Coming up in the next half hour, we're going to go back to the story about Panama, the tax haven, and what's going on. Is New Zealand a tax haven? The politicians, well, the government are saying, no, we're not. But others disagree. Tax expert Michael Littlewood joins us live. Lydia Ko's dramatic one-shot, historic victory. This woman is 18. She's just old enough to go to the pub. She's #1 in the world and daylight is second. We're going to talk about that in a moment. And could Christchurch get a new currency? It sounds kind of nutty, but actually in cities where this is being trialled, it really works. All of that coming up in the next 29 minutes. But first, Katrina Batten with RNZ News.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. The Prime Minister says New Zealand does not operate as a tax haven for wealthy foreigners, but its tax system is designed to ensure New Zealanders pay their tax. A massive leak of confidential documents has revealed how scores of the world's wealthy and political elite use Panamanian law firm Mossack Fonseca to set up tax havens, including in New Zealand. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
More than 12,000 offshore trusts are registered in New Zealand. An overseas trust set up here with overseas assets, but which does no business in this country and has no local income, is tax exempt. Opposition parties say New Zealand's link to tax avoidance practices is not a good look and want the government to tighten the rules. John Campbell rejects any suggestion New Zealand is a tax haven, saying it operates under a system of full disclosure. He says the tax system was reviewed by the OECD in 2013 and was given what he describes as a clean bill of health. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
The Corrections Minister is not ruling out Serco running the Mount Eden remand facility in the future. The private prison manager has been ordered to pay Corrections $8 million for its mismanagement of Mount Eden. Corrections stepped in to manage the jail last July and will continue to do so until Serco's contract runs out early next year. Judith Collins told Checkpoint Serco could tender to renew its contract.
We've always chosen not to rule out providers because we always think you've got to look at these on the facts and what you know at the time. So it's always possible that they might wish to tender, but I don't know that that's going to happen.
Judith Collins says senior management failures have also happened at publicly run prisons in New Zealand. The body of Māori broadcaster Wharere Ngata, who died on Sunday, is being taken home to the East Coast settlement of Ruatoria. The convoy of Māori broadcasters will take the broadcaster, author and lexicographer onto his marae of Huriharama tonight. Former broadcaster Te Anga Nathan says Whai Ngata was the godfather of Māori broadcasting, a steady hand at the helm of TVNZ's Māori and Pacific Programming Department and respected by his colleagues. Mr Ngata was the author of the Ngata Māori Dictionary that's described as a taonga for language learners of past, present and future generations. Wharere Ngata was 74 years old, of Ngāti Porou and Te Whānui a Apanui. Greece has begun returning migrants from the island of Lesbos to Turkey under a landmark European Union deal aimed at stopping the influx of migrants and refugees into Europe since last year. Under the deal, Ankara will take back all migrants and refugees, including Syrians, who enter Greece illegally. In return, the EU will take in thousands of Syrian refugees directly from Turkey and reward it with more money, early visa-free travel and progress in its EU membership negotiations. 2 Turkish-flagged passenger boats carrying 131 migrants set sail from Lesbos to the Turkish town of Dikili this evening. A Hawara grandmother has been described as the glue that held her family together at the sentencing of 3 men convicted of her manslaughter. Christine Ann Fairweather was hit and killed by a car as she tried to move metal barriers deliberately placed on State Highway 3 in Normanby in August 2004. Our Taranaki reporter Robin Martin was at the High Court in New Plymouth today.
In his victim impact statement, Christine Fairweather's husband John said her death had destroyed his life. He said he had lost his job and driving licence, had taken to alcohol and was now on medication. Mr Fairweather said he wakes every morning thinking her death was a nightmare, but it was real and he lives it every day. 19-year-old Samuel Lance Hawkins, 21-year-old Daniel George Gavin and 18-year-old Jason John Campbell were sentenced to home detention of between 7 and 12 months and 100 hours each of community work. This is Robin Martin.
Organisers are expecting a big turnout tonight for a public meeting on the future of rail in Northland. Kiwi Rail's mothballing the line north of Whangarei in August, saying it can't justify the costs of new wagons and maintenance for one customer and one log train a day. The Secretary of the Rail and Maritime Transport Union, Wayne Butson, says unless Northland people find a voice and speak up for rail, they'll lose the line to Auckland next.
You know, these lines are absolutely essential to the regional growth of New Zealand. And under this government, we're just seeing the regions of New Zealand being abandoned. We're seeing the government hoping that Auckland and Christchurch and record levels of immigration will be the solution and the economic panacea for this country. It's a failed recipe.
Wayne Butson says Northland MPs, Māori leaders and rural people fed up with log trucks on the roads are among those on their way to the Whangarei meeting at Forum North at 6:30. In sport, the world #1 Lydia Ko is hungry for more golfing major glory following her latest achievement at the ANA Inspiration in California. The 18-year-old has become the youngest 2-time major winner on the LPGA Tour after sinking a birdie putt on the final hole of the tournament to win by 1 shot. She says she never dreamed of achieving what she has so far.
For these amazing things to be happening, it's unbelievable, but I think it also motivates me to work harder and, try and put myself in, good position and contention whenever I can.
Ko's victory earns her $560,000. The England cricket captain Owen Morgan says it will take his side and all-rounder Ben Stokes in particular time to get over their final over 2020 World Cup loss. The West Indies needed 19 runs off 6 balls to win. Carlos Brathwaite hit the first 4 balls for 6 to give his side the title. Morgan says they simply failed to implement their bowling plan.
It just didn't come off. It's unfortunate that it's him that it happens to, but Ben's a big enough character. He's played a lot of cricket now. It'll take him a while to come back, maybe 10 days or so. The emotional come down of it, but certainly I've no doubt that he'll have a long career and do really well in English shirt.
England captain Owen Morgan. The veteran New Zealand javelin thrower Stuart Farquhar has thrown almost a metre beyond the Olympic qualifying mark for Rio. Farquhar threw 83.93 metres at the Australian Track and Field Champs in Sydney. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the Iranian newspaper archives of historian Sayvush Ranjbardemi. Stuff that hadn't made it to the West until now. Turns out the fundamentalist Islamic Republic isn't as fundamental as many thought. We have a window on the world of the world and how to feed it, at least the humans in it. And Eric Brenstrom from Met Service presents the world's weather. Yep, it's been hot. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Waitomo, also Coromandel, scattered showers clearing this afternoon. They're mainly fine. However, isolated showers tomorrow with heavy falls possible about eastern Coromandel. Taupo Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Showers, some possibly heavy with thunderstorms and hail today, becoming confined to Gisborne and northern Hawke's Bay early tomorrow. Taranaki and Taihape to Wellington, mostly cloudy with isolated showers, clearing tomorrow to fine weather. Wairarapa, Marlborough and Canterbury, scattered showers, clearing this evening, mainly fine tomorrow, but a chance of an afternoon shower in Wairarapa. Nelson and Buller, cloudy periods and isolated showers. Westland mainly fine, isolated afternoon showers tomorrow. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, fine apart from a few showers about Fiordland and coastal parts of Southland and Clutha until tomorrow afternoon. And occasional rain easing to a few showers this afternoon for the Chatham Islands. It is just gone 6:09.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. The government is rejecting any suggestion that New Zealand is acting as an international tax haven. A massive leak of confidential documents has revealed how 70 current and former heads of state have used tax havens, some to launder money, dodge sanctions and evade tax. The Australian newspaper has reported that New Zealand trusts have been set up by companies owned by Mossack Fonseca and Panama with a Dubai account for senior government figures in Malta. Labour Party leader Andrew Little says the Prime Minister should disclose how long he's been aware New Zealand is becoming a favourite investment location for wealthy individuals wanting to hide their money and avoid tax. He says the country's reputation is at stake.
If you look at the Tax Justice Network report that came out a couple of years ago, this is out of the US, and they said that New Zealand alone is probably foregoing upwards of $7 billion in tax revenue a year, then there's got to be something wrong. And we need to know that the way our tax system operates and our corporate structure systems operate is that we are not becoming this sort of haven for foreign interests who want to use those mechanisms to conceal what they're doing. That would just be totally wrong for New Zealand. So we need to know what the government knows, and we need to know what they're going to do about the situation.
So that's Andrew Little. What does the Prime Minister says? Well, he says New Zealand's tax system was reviewed by the OECD in 2013 and was given what he describes as a clean bill of health. He's adamant the country does not operate as a tax haven for wealthy foreigners.
No. Tax havens are where there's non-disclosure of information. New Zealand has full disclosure of information, and so all you've got is a situation where New Zealand's taken a different view from a lot of jurisdictions, and that's because the way we tax is we tax a set law. In other words, it's all about making sure that New Zealanders pay their fair share of tax. What we've got is quite a legitimate regime. We disclose that information through the anti-money laundering rules that we have, and including FACTA and the other different changes that we've made. And actually, the sorts of things where people are a tax havens where they don't have those disclosure regimes and where they're not party to those treaties.
So that's John Key. He says he's been advised that having foreigners set up trusts in New Zealand is worth about $24 million a year to the industry in terms of the fees, tax and GST that are paid. He says he does not know whether any of the foreign money in the trust came from illegal activities. I guess that's one of the nature of trusts, isn't it? 6:11. Professor Michael Littlewood is an expert on tax law who lectures at Auckland University and has provided advice to the New Zealand government, amongst others. He joins us now. Professor Littlewood, nice to have you on the program.
Good evening.
Other than the extent of it, the scale of it, how very big this is, the broader stuff, the Panama stuff, does any of this surprise you?
No, it's not novel at all. It's novel that the media are paying some attention to it, but apart from that, there's nothing novel in it.
OK. Does New Zealand have an issue with these trusts?
Well, the government has a dilemma, I suppose, in that on the one hand, setting up and administering these trusts is a nice little industry. And the lawyers and the accountants and the others who work in that industry contribute to the economy, and they pay taxes on their incomes, and they consume, and they pay GST on their consumption, and they employ people, and so on. On the other hand, the kind of publicity that the government has attracted over the last couple of days is obviously not very helpful.
Yeah, 12,000 plus foreign trusts in New Zealand. Why are they here?
It's difficult to answer that because to get an answer, you'd have to ask the people who set them up, and you probably will find yourself unable to do that because you will be unable to discover who they are.
Yeah. And so is a general rule of practice, why would you put your money in a trust in New Zealand if you had no other relationship with New Zealand?
Well, it's fairly straightforward that doing this enables people to reduce the amount of tax that they have to pay. And so presumably that is at least an important factor in explaining why they do it.
OK, so that would prima facie make us a tax haven. But John Key says, no, we're not a tax haven, are we?
Whether or not you classify New Zealand as a tax haven depends largely on how you define tax haven. If you define a tax haven as, for example, a jurisdiction that doesn't impose any taxes, then obviously New Zealand is not a tax haven. However, I think possibly a more helpful definition would be that a tax haven is a jurisdiction that allows itself to be used by non-residents to avoid the taxes they would otherwise have to pay in their home country. By that definition, New Zealand plainly is a tax haven.
This is funny, isn't it? I know that's not related, and I'm not in any way impugning the reputation of, say, Apple, for example, in relation to what we're learning about Panama. But if we look at BEPS, base erosion and profit shifting, and if we look at what the OECD is trying to do, it all comes back to a sense that actually tax laws are anachronistic and are simply out of touch with a world in which you can move money so readily. Is it time for a re-evaluation across the board of how all of this is controlled?
Well, I don't think there's anything new in this. I don't think there's going to be any final solution to it. That it's been the case that there has been tax avoidance going on for pretty much as long as there have been taxes.
Yes.
And the governments around the world keep changing the rules whenever they find a serious loophole. They usually attempt to plug it, and then the taxpayers and their advisors, particularly wealthy individuals of the kinds who've been in the media recently, and big corporations operating globally, and them and their advisors identify new ways of reducing their liability to tax. From their point of view, all they're doing is ensuring that they don't pay any more tax than they are legally obliged to pay, to which they would add that if they don't do that, they're going to lose out against their competitors who are doing it.
Professor Michael Littlewood, who is a tax law expert based at Auckland University, thank you so much for joining us. Michael, it's 15 minutes past 6. Serco has apologised for the way it ran Mount Eden Prison, but says a sudden influx of prisoners made its task more difficult. It says it was trying to hire extra staff when the Department of Corrections stepped in and took over running the prison. Under an agreement announced today, Corrections will continue to run the prison until Serco's contract ends in March of next year, and has ordered the company to pay for those management costs and to pay back bonuses. This was a mediated settlement announced today. Mohammed Hassan was at the announcement of this agreement.
This morning, the Corrections Minister, Judith Collins, announced Serco won't be allowed to run Mount Eden Prison for the remainder of its contract. Corrections, which has managed the prison for the last 9 months, will continue to do so using Serco staff.
The Serco staff, some of the Serco staff who are working there, most of them, will be provided on a contractual basis as a labour supply agreement between Serco and Corrections, and these are staff who have been working there and have been working there with Corrections having stepped in as well.
Serco will pay Corrections $8 million for the management costs and won't be making any profit until the end of its contract.
Serco is not making any money on it, basically, that they're paying the cost and Corrections is paying them the cost back. They have obligations to provide a certain number of staff, and Corrections will pay for those staff, and clearly Corrections will pick up a lot of those staff, I would have thought, next year.
The Serco Asia Pacific Chief Executive, Mark Irwin, told the news conference today the company failed to meet its service obligations in the months leading up to the takeover.
In the period immediately before the step-in by the department, there were certain aspects of our service delivery which did not meet the standards of the contract and certainly the standards that we set for ourselves. And for that I am truly sorry.
Mr. Irwin wouldn't comment on why Serco was still fighting in the High Court against the Chief Inspector's report into its handling of Mount Eden, but says it has to do with the process of the investigation. He says Serco was struggling to cope with nearly 1,000 extra prisoners in New Zealand last year, many of whom would have been processed through the remand prison.
Those changes happened in a way that was both dramatic and fast, and we were trying to respond to all of those things and were in discussions with the department, as I said, when these issues emerged last year. So we were not blind to them, and we did not ignore them, we were actively trying to address them.
The Corrections Chief Executive, Ray Smith, says the prison has been running well under his watch ever since staffing numbers were increased.
I've been really proud about the way that the Corrections staff and Serco staff have blended on the floor and got the job done for New Zealand. I think we're doing a good job with the prisoners, but this is a tough prison. It's a volatile environment. There are thousands of movements in and out of this place all of the time, and it's largely an unstable prison population.
Mr. Smith says he's reassured Serco staff today none of them will lose their jobs until the contract ends, and it's likely Corrections will hire some of them after that. He dodged questions about whether he thought this was an indication the privatization of Mount Eden had failed. Mr. Smith says ultimately the decision of whether or not to hire another private contractor to oversee the prison will rest with the government. For Checkpoint, Mohammed Hassan.
It's 90 minutes past 6, which means in 11 minutes we'll watch PM at 6:30 with John Greaves. Tonight, John is going to look in depth at how the world's rich and powerful launder money and evade tax. And Donald Trump, his daily declaration now, the latest one is that the United States is on the brink of a massive recession. All of that and more coming up in 10.5 minutes. As you heard earlier in the program, Lydia Ko, we had her coach on, has become the youngest two-time major winner in LPGA Tour history after winning the Inspiration A&A. The A&A Inspiration in California by a shot. Ko birdied the 18th hole to beat a trio. We're in the wide shot. Ko birdied the 18th hole to beat a trio of golfers when she was tied for the lead with when she entered the 18th. Right, man. She's the youngest golfer of either sex to win two majors since young Tom Morris, who won the Open in 1869. Here to talk about it all is our sports reporter Matt Chatterton. Matt, look. She is remarkable, isn't she? I mean, you can't. She's 18 years old, and she just looks completely on top of it.
Yeah, I saw a stat today. I think in her last 14 tournaments, she's finished either second or first in 9 of those tournaments. So she's really in control of her own game at the moment, and I think now she's amassed 12 wins on the LPGA Tour all before her 19th birthday later this month. So yeah, quite impressive.
And leaving all the chaps that we normally talk about with reverential awe, Tiger Woods setting aside the issues he obviously had after a few years, the Greg Normans, the Arnolds, all of them. She's way ahead of any of them.
Yeah, well, so far, 2 majors at the age of 18, not many people can claim that they've had that success so early on, and I think that comes down to her temperament and, how she was brought up here in New Zealand, as David alluded to in your interview. She was very composed throughout the entire game. In fact, she showed a little bit of emotion. I think we have a clip of her after her win talking about how she was going to jump into Poppy's Pond on the 18th.
I never really imagined it. I always saw the Poppy's Pond and I said, man, that's such a clear water, you don't exactly know how, but I don't know. I gotta think of something funny or good, just as long as I don't break anything.
Along with her sister and mom. At the end, at least.
Yeah, so as you heard her there, that was after she'd won, and she just sounded, so relaxed and chilled out after she'd just won her second major, and I think she also won something like $560,000. I mean, not that she's a woman that probably cares too much about how much.
Yeah, but nice work if you can get it, Matt.
Yeah, true, indeed. And
I'm sure she pays her tax on it too, which sets her aside from many of the people we've been talking about tonight. Let's talk about T20 Windies. What about that last over? Oh, baby.
I wouldn't want to be Ben Stokes at the moment.
No.
Yeah, it's quite weird, isn't it, that a New Zealand-born player sort of cost England the result in the end. Ben's obviously was born in Christchurch, spent a number of years living here, but no, Carlos Brathwaite absolutely took control of that last over. Such a young fella too, to hit 4 sixes in a row to win it when they needed 19 off the last over.
Yeah, they needed 19 off the last over and he got 24 and 4 balls.
Yeah, that's remarkable. And I mean, he didn't time a couple of his sixes that well, but they still carried so far. He's a massive man. He was standing next to Marlon Samuels, who's been around for a long time, and got quite chirpy actually in the match. Got in trouble. I think he got fined 30% of his match fee.
Did.
Oh, anyway, standing next to Marlon, he made him look short, and Marlon Samuels would be well over 6 foot. They're big men, those West Indians. They're huge. We actually have also a clip from them celebrating after their win in traditional West Indies style on the team bus.
DJ, bravo! DJ, bravo! DJ, bravo! West Indies are champion! 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 Yo! Let me take this moment to big up all the Windies fans all over the world. Windies fans are champions. This is for you. This is for you people. Today, we create history.
Yes,
that's how to celebrate.
Well, they had a good reason to celebrate because also the West Indian women's team won as well. They beat Australia by 8 wickets with 3 balls to spare. So a lot of reason to celebrate in the Caribbean.
When I was a young man, that West Indian team, Viv Richards, Clive Lloyd, Holding, Garner.
Ambrose is still an assistant coach of the team.
Yeah, I'm so pleased they're back. Cricket is a better game when the Windies are going off. Yeah. Matt, lovely. And we should say, Matt, you organised Lydia Coast Coach to talk on the show tonight.
Oh,
yeah, Matt, you
piece
rock.
of cake.
You're the man. Matt Chatterton, our sports reporter in Auckland. Some people in the Bay of Plenty are upset small vessels, as well as fishing and diving, will be allowed in the waters around the Astrolabe Reef as of tomorrow. They say the exclusion zone has allowed marine life to thrive. We talked about this on Friday night, but now all of that will be undone. Maya Burry reports.
The regional harbour master is making changes to the exclusion zone in the area off the coast of Tauranga, which has been in place since the container ship Rena foundered on the reef in October 2011. With salvage work finished in the area, the reef is being reopened to vessels under 500 tonnes. The leader of the Save Astrolabe Reef campaign and marine biologist T.A. Sayers says it's incredibly disappointing news.
Essentially, we're going to go back to pre-RENA conditions within a matter of months. There's no ifs, buts or maybes about it. I mean, the last 5 years of biological bounce back that we've seen at Astrolabe and Otaheite will be completely gone in the next 3 to 4 months.
Maritime New Zealand has withdrawn 2 statutory notices, which declared the wreck hazardous to navigation. The Bay of Plenty Regional Harbour Master, Peter Buell, says he can't exclude people where there's no maritime safety risk.
Ever since the incident, there's been work going on the reef, salvage work. So as long as that work was ongoing for the safety of the people doing the job, we kept an exclusion zone over the entire area. The work is finishing today. So the exclusion zone will be amended commencing tomorrow.
Forest and Birds Alan Fleming says the Minister needs to urgently intervene and extend the exclusion zone for another 2 years to allow for discussion around how to best protect the reef's biodiversity.
I'd just ask that the Minister consider the wide support for maintaining the exclusion zone so that the community can have the conversation about its future protection.
But it might not be the end of the story. Forest and Bird is supporting a bid by the group Save Astrolabe Reef to get the Ministry for Primary Industries to have the exclusion zone temporarily extended to allow for fishing stock to continue to replenish. But T.A. Sayers says the community isn't being heard.
Potentially the Minister could say tomorrow that they'll close the reef, but the issue is there really a willingness?
T.A. Sayers worries the government's next move might be too little too late. The Ministry for Primary Industries is considering the request to extend the exclusion zone and keep boats away from the reef. For Checkpoint, Maya Burry.
A separate currency for Christchurch could be in circulation by next year. A council group is currently working out how the Christchurch dollar, which is yet to be named, could work. An interesting concept, sure, but is the city serious about it? Well, we Skype City Councillor Raf Manji to ask, are they for real?
No, John, it isn't. It's real. Community currencies have been the lifeblood of society since the beginning of time. There's some 2,500 community currencies in operation around the world, and I think it's time that Christchurch had one of significance.
Well, Raf, I wasn't prepared to believe you, so I went and did my own research, and I have to acknowledge on the radio that you are indeed correct. And in fact, there's a thing called the Bristol pound, right? The Bristol pound, which I think you've possibly modelled your model on a little bit, and that is the second largest currency in Great Britain now, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and there's also a Brixton pound as well, which is also doing quite well. And so there's also a Totnes pound. So I mean, there are quite a few community currencies in the UK at the moment. What I like about the Bristol pound is it's actually got convertibility, so it's actually backed by national currency, which is obviously the pound, and that makes it important because I mean businesses are much more likely to accept that in payment, and they can use it to pay business rates. So that's really the approach that we want to take here.
So what's the point of it? Why bother?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, if you think about how money comes into existence anyway, generally the state has the monopoly on printing money and issuing notes and coins. The private banking system actually creates most of the money in supply, around 98% of it. But it's a nice little earner. But I think the thing around community currencies is you create a currency that generally has to be spent in the local economy. And this creates a multiplier effect. So what they've found in Bristol is that for every pound spent, it creates £1.76 worth of economic activity in the local economy. So that's a huge multiplier effect. And they found the same in Brixton as well. Because you can
forgive me, but I don't understand why is that the case?
Because there's no leakage. If you think about, your national currency, you can spend it anywhere around in the country, and of course people can buy and sell it from overseas as well. When you're dealing with a currency that's in a very constrained area, and this is the same even with, say, time-based currencies, like we have the Littleton Time Bank here, people only exchange it in their local community, which means that that money stays there and it doesn't leak outside the economy.
Okay, so is this now a possibility? Might it actually happen in Christchurch?
Yeah, I think it will. I mean, we're being very deliberate about this. We don't want to rush it. There are lots of pitfalls in developing local currencies.
Who is going to make this happen in Christchurch, and we will explore that in greater depth as it's happening. Fascinating concept, but it really does work in the communities where it's tried. They're also looking at it in Northland too, I think. That's Checkpoint for tonight. Sorry to bunk out of that Raf Manji interview a bit early, but we will go back to that subject, and we'll be back on the wireless tomorrow at 5. Good night.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Prime Minister John Campbell says the tax system is designed to ensure New Zealanders pay their tax and is not a haven for wealthy foreigners. The Corrections Minister is not ruling out allowing Serco to run the Mount Eden prison in future. The first boats deporting migrants from Greece to Turkey have departed under a plan aimed at easing mass migration to Europe. And a cannabis-based product has been approved to help a patient with Tourette syndrome. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Welcome to World Watch PM. I'm John Greaves. Good to be back with you. Coming up tonight, violent clashes between troops of 2 former Soviet republics, renewed calls in Hong Kong for independence from China, and footage unearthed of one of Britain's most famous and hated